If you have a muscle group or a body part that no matter how many sets and exercises you do for that body part, it never seems to improve and look better, even if the rest of your body is changing, then this podcast is going to be for you. Welcome back to another episode of the Eric Roberts Fitness Podcast. And in this episode, I'm going to do a deep science dive of how to bring up lagging body parts. And what I mean by lagging body parts is, let's say you can see changes in your shoulders, but your glutes just take forever. Or, like me, I can see changes in my back and my arms pretty quickly, but my chest takes forever to grow and develop and change. So if you have that muscle group and that body part, then this podcast is going to do a deep dive into what you should do from a training standpoint, what you should do from a nutrition standpoint, and the exact strategies that I give to myself and my clients that you'll be able to steal in this episode today. Now, I'm going to go into the science, but like I say, I will quote unquote make it easy to understand, even if you're not a fitness expert or you're a complete beginner. So stick with me and let's dive in. The first tactic I want to get into is how to set up your workouts so you can build muscle and see that specific area of your body improve. But right before we get into the specific tactics of workouts, I also just want to say these strategies that I am going to be giving you are for more advanced or intermediate trainees. I think the mistake a lot of people make, especially when you are first starting out in following a proper strength training program, and maybe you've done Beachbody or Orange Theory or HIIT workouts before. If you're newer, I would say in the first 6 to 18 months of really following a program, knowing you're doing things right, having proper form, lifting close to failure, lifting heavy, all those things, you don't necessarily have to overly worry about the stuff I'm going to talk about in the podcast today. It's not to say you shouldn't know it, because you're going to get to a point where you will need to know it and it will benefit you. But if you're more of a beginner, no matter what, you're going to see some good changes in all areas of your body, because you want to get those newbie gains in all areas of your body versus just focusing on one specific muscle group. I often say, instead of for beginners, instead of trying to take like a scalpel to your body, you kind of just want to take like a sledgehammer, and you want to just hit all the muscle groups evenly, equally, so you can build the foundation that you then will be able to fine tune. But you don't need to fine tune right now if you're brand new. So just keep that in mind if you are a beginner. Now, I think the information will still be interesting. And like I said, as you get farther in your journey, this will be beneficial for you to implement. I just don't want you overly worrying about it if you're more in the beginner stage. Now, that being said, if you are somebody who's more intermediate and advanced and you want to bring up a lagging body part, the first tactic I call is the sandwich strategy. So the problem slash mistake here is when you start with a compound movement, let's say a bench press, your body is going to naturally recruit the most efficient path to lifting that weight. And it's usually by using your strongest muscle groups, leaving the lagging muscle group behind and understimulated and undertrained. Because if, let's just say, my chest is a weak point, my shoulders and my triceps take over during a bench press more than me actually fatiguing my chest locally, right? And when I say locally, I mean in that one specific muscle. And the science behind this sandwich strategy I'm going to talk about here in a second is it leverages something called post-activation performance enhancement and size principle of motor unit recruitment. All this means, in simple terms, you're using the muscle group the most that you want to improve. And you're taking that muscle group close to failure and recruiting as many of those motor units in that specific muscle group that you want. All right. So, again, an example of this would be, somebody's doing 5 sets of heavy bench press, but, they don't really finish with their chest feeling very fatigued. They finish with more of their shoulders and their triceps feeling pretty fatigued. So, the the example or the lesson here is you want to start with some sort of isolation movement that works that muscle group in the shortened position. And again, I know we're getting kind of in depth here, but I promise just stick with me. I will make sure it makes sense for you. So, starting with an isolation movement in the shortened position, we will use chest as the example here, and I'll go through some other examples later in the podcast. But this would mean, let's say you start with a chest fly instead of starting with a chest press. Because when you're doing a chest fly, this, number one, isolates your chest muscles. It isolates local fatigue and stimulus. This also, from this local kind of stress and fatigue you're creating, it also heightens what we call the mind muscle connection. And I've said before in the podcast, you don't need mind muscle connection to build muscle. You don't need mind muscle connection to see progress. But when we're speaking about a lagging body part, it can help enhance the motor unit and muscle fiber recruitment if you are able to, quote unquote, have the mind muscle connection a tad bit better. And the reason this is so good, because the shortened position, this is like when you are squeezing the muscle. So think about a chest fly, you're squeezing your chest at the end. That's when you really feel like the pump, right? You really feel your muscles kind of harden up a bit. That's what she said. But that shortened position gets a lot of blood flow into that muscle. It heightens the mind muscle connection, and it gets that local stimulus starting to fire. And this is good because this will help you for that one exercise. But the real kind of trick and the real secret here is when you do, let's say, 3 sets of chest flies, you go then into your bigger compound movement, a bench press, incline bench press, even push-ups to a degree. But now, when you go to that compound movement, that then is in the lengthened position, because what is the hardest part of a bench press? It's at the bottom, right? You have to like stretch your chest and try to get the weight up off your chest. That's the hardest part. That's why it works your chest in the lengthened position the most. So when you do this, your chest is now awake and it's firing more, and it's already had recruited more muscle fibers and motor units in your chest because of the chest flies that you did in the first exercise. So when you do this, your brain is almost forced to use your chest more to move the heavy weight in the compound movement, because the motor units and the muscle fibers have already been firing from the previous exercise. So now what becomes the limiting factor in your bench press is your chest. It's no longer your shoulders or your triceps, it's your chest. And so that means you're going to work your chest a little bit more because of this. And you'll be able to lengthen your chest, which recent research has shown us there is benefits to the lengthened position of an exercise. So I'll give you some more examples of lengthened position. The bottom of a squat, that's the lengthened position of your quads or your glutes. The top of a lat pull down, that is the lengthened position of a lat pull down. The bottom of a bicep curl, that is the lengthened position of a bicep curl. So it's essentially when you are stretching the muscle, all right? So we have the first exercise, the shortened isolation. So you can think of like a chest fly. The second exercise is a lengthened compound. So this is where you're doing your bigger movement and you're working into lengthen. And then you go to a third exercise of another shortened isolation based movement. If you can, make it a different angle to maximize the what is called, maximize the pump, maximize the blood flow, maximize the cell swelling inside of your muscles, which can help trigger that mTOR growth pathway. In a couple of podcasts ago, Sophie and I talked about the mTOR. So if you want to listen to that, you can go listen. I think it was in the How to Lose Fat and Build Muscle at the Same Time podcast, the Body Recomposition podcast. Very good podcast if you haven't listened to it. So definitely would recommend going to do that. But that's kind of why I call it the sandwich strategy. So you're doing the first exercise, let's just say 3 sets of 8 reps with chest fly. Second exercise, you're doing the lengthen compound, let's say 3 sets of 5 reps on a bench press. And then you're doing the third exercise, another shortened isolation movement. Let's say this is now a pec deck fly or an incline dumbbell fly or an incline cable fly, some sort of shortened position movement that's going to work that lagging body part in a shortened position from a different angle. And so you have this sandwich of those are your first 3 exercises of the workout that you are doing. And now, again, I want to be very clear because I know a lot of our clients listen to this podcast. This is not to say this is the only way you can program a workout or the only way you're going to, improve a lagging body part. This is one way, and I think it's a good way, but it's not the only way. But if you want to try it in your workout, I would definitely recommend. And the kind of the metaphor or the analogy I wrote down here was it's like the lead singer versus the backup band. If the backup band, let's say your triceps and your shoulders, are too loud, you can't hear the lead singer, your chest. The primer move, that first isolation based movement, is like turning up the singer's mic before the rest of the band even starts playing. You want the lead singer to be the loudest because that's what you want people to hear. You want the other stuff working in the background. And so if you have trouble, whether it's with your chest, we'll use glutes as an example. Let's say instead of starting with, instead of starting with a Bulgarian split squat, maybe you start with a hip thrust or even a glute kickback. I know this is kind of controversial to what I normally say, which is you should be starting your movements with a heavy compound movement. And once again, you can still do that and bring up a lagging body part. So I don't want you to freak out and think you're doing anything wrong. This is just a strategy where maybe you just do 2 sets of a glute kickback to kind of have a little bit of progressive overload, have some local stimulus, start to recruit those muscle fibers, start to recruit more of those motor units, and then go into your Bulgarian split squat. Because a glute kickback is a shortened position exercise, and a Bulgarian split squat, an RDL, a regular squat, that is a lengthened position exercise. So you would kind of go back and forth between those movements for that specific muscle group. All right. So that's the sandwich strategy. And you could use this for really anything. So if you have, I'll just give you a little bit more examples. If your back is a lagging body part, maybe you start with like a one arm cable row. That's more like working that lat in the very shortened position there because the cable is heavier as you're kind of going up. The weight is going up. You're bringing your hand back towards you. And then you would go into something like a pull up. And then you would go to something like you know, uh, uh, even like a lat pull down, for example, where you might the hardest part would be kind of like getting that lat pull down to the bottom and really squeezing your muscles there. So that was an exercise. That would be an example of your back. Let's say your triceps are something that you want to improve. So maybe you start with a tricep press down, like a long rope tricep press down. That is the shortened isolation movement. And then you go to a bench press, or like a close grip tricep press, because that'll work it in the shorten. And then maybe you go to a one arm cross body tricep extension because that works it in the shortened position. So I could go on, but that is the sandwich strategy, one strategy that you could potentially use to get those lagging body parts up. And by the way, if you're like, wow, this is a lot, I understand. Again, I'm trying to, this is for a bit more advanced people, but I'm trying to make it as simple as I can. But if you're like, hey, you know what, Eric? Just tell me what to do and I'll do it. Just write a program for me. Obviously, we do that inside of our online coaching as well. So if you click the link in the show notes of this podcast, you can learn more about our online coaching program. We have two main options. The first option is our fully personalized one-on-one coaching. So you'll get weekly check-ins with your coach, a fully personalized workout program to bring up your lagging body parts. Literally all you'll have to do is just look at your phone, do the workouts in the app that are made specifically for you, and you'll know you're doing the right things. And then, of course, we help you with nutrition as well, which we'll talk about in this podcast too. That's option one. Option two is our Clubhouse app. This is more of our group coaching program, but we do have specialization programs like a glute program to specialize on your glutes. We do have a lat and delt program. We have a bench press program. We have a quad program. So we have various different programs that are specialization programs you could also dive into inside of our app. But both those two options, you can click the link in the show notes to learn more. Now, heading into section 2 of the podcast now. So we talked about the sandwich strategy. The next section is going to be talking about basically what I just said in our Clubhouse app. We have specialization programs. This is talking about specialization and like the recovery checkbook. So the mistake a lot of people make is they try to add more exercises and more sets and more reps to the body part that they want to improve. And like in theory, that makes sense because you're like, if I do more with this muscle group, I should see more muscle growth. But what typically happens is this leads to something called non-functional overreaching. And I'll talk about exactly what that is in a second. But an example of this would be if you add 10 sets of chest, but you're still doing the same amount of sets for your quads and for your glutes and for your shoulders and for your back, your body's recovery resources are spread too thin and nothing ends up growing. There is something called your MRV, which is your maximum recoverable volume. And so this just means how many sets per muscle group per week can you do to like maximize muscle growth. And so this shows that if you push one muscle group to the limit, so let's say you want to grow your chest or you really want to grow your glutes. If you push one muscle group to its limit, let's say 20 sets per week, which would be a lot, you must decrease volume elsewhere to avoid elevated systemic fatigue, inflammation, and cortisol, which would halt muscle protein synthesis. So let me break that down just even more. You must decrease volume. When I say volume, all I mean is sets per muscle group per week. So if you add sets to your glutes because you want to grow your glutes, you would take away sets or exercises from your chest. So for example, in our Clubhouse app, we have a glute specialization program. We don't do a ton of chest workouts because the volume that would be put on your chest, we want to put on your glutes because there's only so much recoverable volume that you can recover from. If you do too much, like we said, your body is going to have systemic fatigue, inflammation, and elevated cortisol, and it will blunt and halt muscle protein synthesis. And there was actually, I always refer to this, but It's just the most concise I've ever seen. There's been research done by James Krieger who showed that this MRV and even sets per muscle group in a workout, it's a bell curve. So you can add more, add more, add more. And for those of you guys who are watching on YouTube, which if you're not watching on YouTube, you can. We are now on YouTube, Eric Roberts Fitness Podcast on YouTube. But there's a bell curve. It goes up, and at some point, it starts to dip and then go down. So when you do too much, you pass the top of the bell curve and your results start to diminish. So, that being said, knowing this, the lesson and the solution you should do is use maintenance volume for your stronger, already improving muscle groups. And this could be as low as like 4 to 6 sets per week. So, as an example, let's say your quads are strong and good, but your glutes you want to grow and they're underdeveloped, they're lagging. You might only do, let's say you're doing quads, you're doing legs twice a week. You might do 3 sets of a leg press and then 3 sets of a leg extension for your quads. And that's all you do throughout the week for your quads. The rest of it is going to, and some of it might be put on your hamstrings, and I'll talk about that in a second as well. But for the sake of this, the rest of the maximum recoverable volume, the rest of the specialization volume is going towards the lagging muscle group that you want to bring up. So you might do 6 sets for your quads over the course of a week, but then you might do 20 to 25 sets of glutes throughout the week. And this could look like, let's just say again, you're doing 2 leg days per week. You would start with a hip thrust, 4 sets of 10 reps. And then you do an RDL, 3 sets of 8 reps. And then you do a glute kickback, 3 sets of 8 reps. And then you do 2 sets of walking lunges. And then you do 3 sets of leg extensions. So that would be one day. So pretty much all of that is glutes, and we got some quads. And then over here on your next leg day, you do glute kickback, 3 sets of 12 reps to start. And then your second exercise is a Bulgarian split squat, 3 sets of 10 reps. The next rep is a kickstand, or the next exercise is a kickstand hip thrust, 3 sets of 10 reps. And then your final exercise is, a quad bias leg press. That would be right around like 20-ish sets per week for your glutes. And that would be around 6-ish sets for your quads. And again, that's just one example that might be actually programmed a tad bit different, but hopefully you get the point. You have to pull back on your quads to then grow your glutes. But it's not just lower body. So if you want to grow your glutes, you would also have to slightly pull back on your volume on your back, your shoulders, your chest, right? And I always tell people there's like the way I think about this, you can really focus and prioritize one part of your upper body and one part of your lower body. So, for example, again, inside of the clubhouse, if we are doing the glute program, we're really focusing on glutes and shoulders. Those are like the two main things we're focusing on because typically, especially women, those two things usually like to go together. Women like nice defined shoulders and they like bigger glutes. So we're going to focus on those two things. Not to say we're not going to do chest or back or quads or hamstrings, but the emphasis in a specialization program is going to go on one upper body and one lower body muscle group. So I know there was a lot, but the visual metaphor here that I wrote down was kind of like a Wi-Fi router. And so if you have 10 devices streaming 4K, the connection is slow for everybody. AKA, if you're just doing all of the exercises, all of the sets, all of the reps, your body's not really going to grow that much after the beginner stage. You're going to grow just at a slower rate, and those lagging body parts won't really get up. But if you disconnect 9 of those devices, that one remaining tablet gets a lightning fast, dedicated stream. And that's what it's like to do one of these specialization phases in your workouts. So take a look at, I mean, some of you don't even have a workout program, which that is a problem in and of itself, but that's a conversation for a different day. Look at your program and see how much volume are you really doing over the course of the week. And by the way, like people are doing 15 sets of glutes in one workout, let alone like across the course of a week, and they wonder why they're not seeing progress. So typically for a muscle group, for a bigger muscle group like glutes, quads, back, chest, you'll probably have somewhere around 20 sets per muscle group per week. And then again, these sets are like hard, close to failure, heavy working sets. It's not just like a warm up set. It has to be taken close to failure. And then for smaller muscle groups like biceps, triceps, rear delts, those are typically, I'd say 8 to 12 is like a lot of direct sets for those muscle groups. Because again, those muscle groups are getting worked in other movements, like if you're doing a squat, if you're doing a bench press, a shoulder press, those sort of things. So that is section 2, specialization and recovery. Now, we've covered the sandwich strategy. We've covered the specialization. Again, if this is a lot for you and you're like, wait a minute, I want to improve a certain body part, but I just do this for me, Eric. We can do that. Click the link in the show notes of the podcast to join our one-on-one coaching. This is exactly what we do. You won't have to think about any of this. You'll just look at the workout and you'll know it's right. Now, section 3, I want to get into nutrient timing and something called glycogen flux. So the problem or the mistake that people make here when they're trying to bring up a specific muscle group and body part is eating the same way they would on a day where they're not training or wanting to improve that body part. So on your priority day where you really want to bring up the muscle group, your muscles are screaming for raw material that aren't there if you don't give it the nutrients that it needs. And an example of this is like somebody wants to improve their chest and they're lifting at 5 p.m., but they haven't eaten since 11 a.m. And so they have no real fuel to push that lagging body part to its limits and progressively overload and recruit the muscle fibers and push close to failure because they don't have the ingredients or the materials or the energy to do so. And a little bit of the science behind this is when we talk about insulin sensitivity and nutrient partitioning, timing, especially carbs, protein as well, but especially carbs, timing this around the priority workout, you drive glucose and amino acids into the specific cells that have been sensitized by training or will be sensitized by the training, whether you're doing, pre-workout or post-workout. And so the solution or the lesson here is you want to kind of high carb front load to ensure muscle glycogen is topped off. And this should be done the night before. So if you're training chest on, well, I keep using chest. I don't know. I'll use glutes. People want to grow their glutes and their chest. Like those are the two biggest things I feel like, but I'll use glutes this time. If you're training glutes on Thursday, the night before your dinner on Wednesday, you should have a very good amount of carbohydrates. Now, what is a good amount of carbohydrates? It depends. It depends on how much body weight you have. It depends on when you're training. Like, are you training the next day in the morning or at night? It depends on how many carbs are you allowed for the day, right? Like, what is your overall calorie and macro goal? But if you want me to give you a general range, I would say anywhere from 40 to 100 grams of carbs the night before. Again, someone like myself, I might even do like 150 plus grams of carbs because my calories maybe be higher than somebody else's, but somewhere around that range to kind of front load and make sure the muscle glycogen is topped off. And then pre-workout, you want to also have carbohydrates because your muscles will use this for energy. Full transparency, it will mostly use the carbs you ate earlier. But again, what is earlier? So are you training later in the day? Are you training earlier in the day? Training more midday? So this somewhat depends. And this is why I always just say, like, it's always a good idea if you're trying to build muscle to have some sort of carbohydrates 30 to 90 minutes before your workout. No matter when you're working out, no matter what, having carbs. Now, again, how much carbs should you have? It depends. For example, for me, yesterday, I had like 130 grams of carbs before my workout. I was roughly about 60 to 75 minutes before my workout, but I'm 6'4", 240 pounds, and I want to make sure yesterday I was trying to bring up my quads. Like that's the one muscle group I want to bring up really. So I'm really trying to front load that and make sure I have enough carbohydrates and have enough glycogen. Yours might be 60 or 40. It really just does depend. And this is why it's very individual. This is what we do with our clients, and we help them come up with a plan that's fully personalized to them. So if you're interested in getting some more personalized help here, just click the link in the show notes of the podcast and we can do that for you in coaching. But you want to have pre-workout. Maybe you have an intra-workout. So that means during your workout. This one is, I would say, for 50% of people, probably positive. For 50%, probably just kind of a waste of money. If you are going to have intra-workout carbs, I would get something called highly branched cyclic dextrin. You can just like Amazon this, or there's a few different companies that make this, but it's just a super, like almost instantly digesting form of carbohydrates that your muscles can use for energy during the workout. So potentially that, and again, during a workout where you're trying to bring up a lagging body part, this can be beneficial so you can fully push that muscle as far as you can and potentially even beyond what you could have before. And then post-workout, you want high glycemic carbs. So fast digesting, insulin spiking carbs, and you want fast acting protein to spike insulin and halt the muscle protein breakdown. I've used this analogy before as well, but think of insulin as a Lamborghini, and think of the carbs and the protein as the passenger seat. The Lamborghini is going to get those carbs and protein into your muscles as quickly as possible to start the muscle repair and muscle building process, which is what you want for those muscle groups, for all muscle groups, but especially those muscle groups that are lagging. And another analogy you can use here is like building a lagging muscle is like pouring concrete foundation. You don't want the truck to arrive 3 days late or 3 hours before the workers show up. Like you want the wet concrete, the carbs, to be poured when the crew is ready to work on it. So that's the workout. And that's how you'll be able to use nutrition from a glycogen and protein standpoint to be able to bring up those lagging body parts as well. And so I would take a look at your typical routine, your typical workout schedule, and see where you can do this. Now, going into not just carbs and protein, but overall calories, this is section 4 that I want to dive into here. I think the problem or the mistake people make is trying to grow a lagging body part while on a calorie deficit or at a very, very lean body fat percentage. And so your biology is always going to prioritize survival over bigger glutes. Your body needs to maintain its survival over growing a fat ass. Okay, just is what it is. So this is where somebody who's trying to be in, a 500 calorie deficit 7 days a week, and they're not a beginner, because like I said in the other podcast, the Lose Fat and Build Muscle at the Same Time podcast, you can lose fat and build muscle at the same time if you have a lot of body fat to lose or if you're a beginner. But as you get more advanced and as you get more lean, being in that calorie deficit, you're going to lose fat, but those lagging muscle groups will never really catch up because there's no surplus of energy for new muscle tissue to be built. I always say your body has to get back to baseline first before it does anything else. So if you're not even doing that, there's no way you're going to improve and build muscle in the lagging body part that you're in. Chronic dieting or even like strict maintenance where you're really not giving your body a ton of extra energy can suppress something called IGF-1, which is insulin-like growth factor. And so giving your body extra energy can almost act like it acts like an environment where, like, imagine if someone just gave you an extra $5,000. You'd be like, shit, okay, well, like, I'm going to do something with this. I can either put it in savings, I can either go spend it on something, I can take a trip, but like that extra money, you're going to do something with. When you get the extra money with your body, the extra calories, your body's going to say, well, what can I do with this? Oh, this person is destroying my chest or my glutes or my back or whatever. I'm going to go put it towards that. Does that make sense? So one way you can do this is you can go into just a straight calorie surplus, right? We talked about this in the previous episode. We talked about this in the glute building episode. But you just go into a surplus of 200 to 300 calories per day. Yes, you will gain a little bit of body fat, but you're going to build muscle if you do all the things that we just said earlier about the sandwich effect, about the volume, about setting up your workouts, having the right nutrient timing. Your body's going to prioritize building muscle and gain very minimal to little body fat. So that's the first way you do that. And the second way could be something called like dynamic maintenance. And what this would look like is on your days where you lift weights with the lagging body part you want to improve, I would call those like priority days. You would add an extra 500 calories. So like you would go into like a 400, 500 calorie surplus on those days. And then on your rest days or your maintenance days, you would maybe even do like a slight 100 to 200 calorie deficit. Because what this could potentially do is keep you lean overall while providing a growth window for those specific lagging body parts. And if you combine that with the section that we just talked about with the nutrient timing, the pre-workout, the post-workout, this gives your body a very anabolic state in that period of time when you just trained that muscle group. So you have the opportunity to build and improve that muscle group in that period of time. Now, do I think this is as effective as doing a surplus? No. But if you're somebody who maybe you can't do a surplus right now, maybe you're afraid of it, maybe you just don't want to commit to it, this could be a way where on those priority days, 400 to 500 extra calories above your maintenance, and the rest days or maintenance days, 100 to 200 less on those days as well. And the analogy I used here is kind of like the battery charger. You don't leave your phone on low power mode if you're trying to watch like a high def movie. It's going to die eventually. Like you plug it in to the wall, aka the calorie surplus, during the high performance task so it doesn't die. Make sense? So you'll put extra energy into those days where you want to build those lagging body parts. And so a quick recap here. Number one, the sandwich strategy. You start with an isolation, then you go to a compound, then you go to an isolation. That's how you can set up your first 3 exercises in your day. Number two, you have the specialization and the recovery checkbook. So you want to make sure you put maintenance volume on the muscle groups you're really not trying to grow, and you put maximum recoverable volume on the muscle groups you are trying to grow. Number three, nutrient timing, pre-workout, intra-workout, post-workout. All of these are incredibly important for creating that anabolic muscle growth part of improving that lagging body part, especially carbohydrates. And then number four, for your overall calories, either going into a calorie surplus of 200 to 300 per day. This is my preferred method. Or number two, you do a little bit of calorie cycling, dynamic maintenance, where on the days you are wanting to improve those body parts, you have 400 to 500 extra calories, mostly coming from carbohydrates, by the way. And then on the rest days or maintenance days, you go in a 100, 200 calorie deficit to provide that growth window for those lagging body parts while also keeping you lean. And one of the last things I want to say here to wrap up the pod, and I hope this has been super helpful for you. And again, if you're like, wow, this guy Eric really knows what he's talking about, and I'd love some extra personalized help, you can click the link in the show notes of the podcast below to learn more about our online coaching program. But one of the last things I want to say is If you have a body part you want to improve and you're like, I hate this area, you don't do exercises to spot reduce fat in the area. What you need to do is build muscle in that area, and that will give you the toned, defined, more aesthetic look that you are going for. And especially for women, there is well, I don't want to get big and bulky. I promise you, you're not gonna get big and bulky. It's very hard to get big. I've been trying my entire life. It's very, very hard. And there's women listening who are like, yeah, I'm trying too, and it's still not happening for me. You gotta build that muscle. Don't be afraid to push close to failure. Don't be afraid to eat the more food. Don't be afraid to eat the carbohydrates because seeing your body change, it's it's a complex process. Like I just talked for 40 minutes about what you need to do. And like I could keep going, but that was pretty in depth. Like, it's not just going to happen by chance. You have to be very strategic. You have to optimize everything you're doing. You have to make sure you're on an efficient science-based plan to actually get the body and the physique and the composition changes that you're looking to get. And if you want to make sure you're doing that, that's exactly why we have our online coaching. So like I said, you can click the link in the show notes below to learn more about our online coaching. This is what we do. We would love to be able to help you out. I hope you really enjoyed the podcast today. If you did, please feel free to leave a 5-star rating and review, and we will chat next time.